Nazila Fathi is a journalist, a translator, and commentator on Iran who reported out of Iran for nearly 2 decades until 2009, when threats from the government forced her and her family into exile. She's been the recipient of numerous fellowships, including a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University, a Shorenstein Fellowship at the Kennedy School, and she was an associate at the Harvard Belfer Center. She's now the author of The Lonely War, one woman's account of the struggle for modern Iran. We're very pleased to welcome its author to Harvard Bookstore tonight. Please join me in welcoming Nazila Fathi.
Thank you so much for coming on this very, very cold evening for me. It's coming back home where I lived, where I started writing this book. I see so many familiar faces, and I hope I can talk to you later after the event. I want to tell you more about why I wrote this book instead of telling you the stories that are in the book. I started realizing how Iran has changed in 2004 before the presidential election that led to the election of the famous President Ahmadinejad. I'd gone to see a reformist journalist at one of the newspapers who was very close to the reform camp. And I went to see him to find out if the reformists had any plans, had a candidate in mind for the presidential elections that were coming up. President Khatami had served his 2 terms as president, and he couldn't run again. I interviewed this politician, didn't get anything. I was quite disappointed that they didn't have a good, viable candidate in mind. I closed my notebook, put it away, put my pen away. This was something I had learned in Iran. The best way to get the real story was to put away my notebook and just linger there for another cup of tea. I don't remember what this politician said, but he made a reference to the Shah and to his father, Reza Shah. And I was a girl who had grown up after the revolution. I'd gone to school under the Islamic regime, and they had taught us at school that the Shah and his father were dictators. So I brushed them off as dictators. And then this politician suddenly snapped at me angrily, and he told me that I didn't know my history. I was completely shocked. Not because what he was saying was strange. I had heard it all along growing up in Iran. My parents had never supported the revolution. They had never supported Khomeini. Ordinary Iranians that I met all the time, even on the street, cab drivers, they always complained about what happened after the revolution. And when I first started my job as a journalist, I went to bookstores to do a story for the New York Times to find out what books were selling well. And it turned out that books about the royal family were among the best sellers. People were curious to know about them. Not that they wanted a return of monarchy, but they were curious what happened to them. And they had a nostalgic feeling about the days before the revolution. But I was shocked that this politician was using the same language that ordinary Iranians were using, because this guy had been a staunch supporter of Khomeini in the beginning of the revolution. And he had been the head of a so-called comité, a morality force that the revolutionaries set up in the beginning of the revolution. And they were in charge of rounding up dissidents and anyone who opposed Khomeini. A lot of those people who were arrested were executed. And people like him were very much responsible for the bloodshed after the revolution. So I was shocked that this guy, who had helped overthrow the regime, who had been part of the bloodshed after the revolution, was now talking against his ideals. And then he said something that made total sense to me. He said that he had fought for political freedom. But what happened after the revolution, Iranians lost their personal freedoms too. And this was something that I understood very well, because I had been 9 years old at the time of the revolution. And the first lesson that I learned was that my life was going to change completely. I could no longer choose what I could wear. I could no longer swim in the swimming pool that was in our housing complex. And I had always thought that it belonged to me. It was where I had spent like 9 years of my life. I'd spent all my summers with my friends, but I could no longer swim in that pool. Instead, I had to sit around the pool in a headscarf and a thick coat and watch the boys my age swim in the pool. And of course, they could also swim only until the age of 16 when they reached puberty. So everything had changed about my life. I had started lying at school to pretend that my family supported the revolution while they didn't. So I just didn't write this book to say how Iran, its people, and its revolutionaries, such as this politician, had evolved, but also to talk about some of the cliches, to say how a lot of stereotypes about Iran were not correct. When I left Iran in 2009, I started giving a lot of talks, and I realized that there were many stereotypes about Iranians, about Iran, that they were not true. And it was nobody's fault, because these stereotypes had become the cliches that presented in Iran, such as the picture on the cover of my book. When I showed this photo to my friends, including my best friend who's sitting here, all my Iranian friends, they got angry and they said, the chador doesn't present you, it doesn't present us, it doesn't present the Iran that we know. But my publisher persuaded me that, this is how the Westerners know Iran. If there is a photo on the book that doesn't show a cleric, doesn't show a woman in the chador, doesn't show a mosque, people would know that this is a book about Iran. And this is just one of the cliches. There are so many of them. One of the questions that I was constantly asked, especially after the Egyptian revolution, was that how come the Iranian uprising of 2009 failed? And it never occurred to me that the uprising had failed. I thought it was the biggest historical event in Iran's recent history. And I knew the Iranians wouldn't go any farther than what they had done. Just 6 months of protests. In 1999, we had some of the worst anti-regime protests in the country. Some of the largest all over the country. The students had staged them because an independent newspaper had been shut down. And the students at one dormitory had staged a protest. And around midnight, the vigilante pro-government forces attacked them, beat them up, killed one student, and injured several others. And that caused huge outrage among students all over the country. And the students have a very efficient network because there are universities in all the cities and towns, and the students have their own network. They have a student association. So they managed to start 1 week of huge protests. And of course, the government was very efficient in cracking them down, rounding up the students, jailing them, and silencing them. A year after the uprising, I met one of the student leaders who had been in prison. He had been just released. He was in a terrible shape. He had been in solitary confinement. But he hadn't given up. He was out and was continuing his work as an activist again. I met him with a colleague who had covered the revolution, and she had studied the French Revolution. And during our interview, she asked the student activist whether he was willing to die for freedom. The student leader looked quite shocked, and he said that he was fighting for a better life. He had no intention or any desire to get killed. I was quite surprised by the question. I mean, you don't ask someone if you're willing to die, or at least not from somebody my generation. When we walked out, my colleague told me that she was very disappointed. And she didn't think that the movement would get anywhere because the students, its leaders, they were not willing to make any sacrifices. And Iranian revolutionaries, in the beginning of the revolution, they were willing to die. They were willing to become martyrs. And this had been true in the French Revolution and in the American Revolution, that revolutions change, democracy needs people's willingness to sacrifice themselves. I started asking this question from other activists and leaders. And all the years that I was in Iran, nobody told me, not even the ardent supporters of democracy, that they were willing to get killed, to die for freedom, for democracy, for any kind of change. And so when 2009 occurred, when people were coming out, I didn't think that people were going as far as anything that meant a bloody confrontation with the regime. I grew up after the revolution. I grew up during a time of war, 8 years of war, and war is quite devastating. You hear about death, you get the news, you see the images of destruction and devastation on TV. Our entire life was overshadowed by the war. And I belong to a generation that builds up a majority of Iranian population. 2/3 of the population were born after the 1979 revolution. We remember what happened after the 1979. There was an institutional breakdown, there was chaos, to a point that people started vying for any kind of security and stability. And amidst that, Khomeini hijacked the revolution. So Iranians, no matter what, they don't want to go through another period of chaos and instability. In addition to that, the Islamic Republic's policies have indirectly created a lot of change. It has transformed Iranian society. The revolutionaries, when they came to power, they knew they couldn't count on the middle class and the upper middle class, even though a lot of them had supported overthrowing the Shah. But a lot of them were leftists, they were communists. That was the ideology of the avant-garde those days. And Khomeini had started alienating the leftists immediately. So Khomeini knew that he couldn't count on those people as the backbone of his support base. So he started drawing people from lower classes, people from the margins of society into the center. A huge number of people were hired into the civil sector. Actually, the number of civil servants doubled after the revolution. And when these people started getting steady incomes, they started moving up in society. More than 80% of Iranian society is middle class. And that includes people in the villages. Partly because the real estate has boomed. A lot of people in the villages are selling their land and they're rich, not even middle class. 70% of the population lives in urban areas. More than half of university students have been women since 2009. Since 2000. In 2009, more than 60% of university students were women. And this trend is very similar to the trend here in the United States. So you're not dealing with a tribal society. You're not dealing with a society where people are willing to lose what they have. In 2009, when I was going out to cover the protests, I had a hard time finding a driver who was willing to drive me to the areas where people were protesting. Cab drivers in my neighborhood were saying that they were afraid somebody would throw a rock on their car and their car would get dented. So if people are not willing to get their car a little bit damaged, you can imagine they're definitely not willing to get killed. And I think they made a very right choice in 2009. On social media, people were discussing whether they were making any kind of gain by coming out on the streets. People were getting killed. About 150 people were killed in the end. And they kept on asking whether this kind of confrontation could help democracy. They went back to their homes. In 2013, utterly disappointed and disillusioned, they came back to the polls. They voted for a moderate president, not the ideal president that they had in mind, just to send a signal, send a message to a regime that does hear these signals, but doesn't necessarily respond to them. But they know that the regime hears it. And it turned out that the regime had decided to respect people's vote this time. And they announced the moderate president, who the majority of people thought that he would get appointed as president, and now he's leading the talks with the West to reach a nuclear deal. I want to end with a current affair issue, the nuclear talks. They are going on. There's going to be another round of talks are going to start in a couple of days on January 18th. A lot of people, a lot of Iranians are hopeful that these talks would bear fruit, that they would get somewhere and this standoff would end finally. And they are not wrong. They are absolutely right by engaging the moderates in this kind of agreement. The West and the United States would be empowering them. And by engaging them, they would empower them to craft policies that would be more responsive to international demands. Iran would have to stand up to its obligations, whether it's about the nuclear program or its roles in other parts of the world. So I'm going to end here, and if you want to ask any questions, I'd prefer to make it more conversational. The question was whether it's just the hardliners in Iran that are opposing a deal, or the Obama administration here is faced with serious opposition, and the fact that there's not going to be a nuclear-free Middle East because the United States and Israel never agreed to it. The title of the book comes from that idea that Iran is in such a lonely place. Iran has fought a war with Iraq for 8 years. I don't know if you remember or not, but in 1999, Iran went almost into a war with Taliban because they attacked Iran's consulate in Mazar Sharif and killed 11 diplomats, including a journalist there. And Iran dispatched its forces to the border. And a war would have been imminent had Iran not pulled back its forces. And a war with Afghanistan would have dragged on just the way it has now. And then we have Pakistan, which has nuclear weapons, other Arab countries in the region that are not friendly toward Iran at all. So Iran is in a very lonely place now, and if it has a neighbor that has nuclear weapons, Israel has nuclear weapons, it's very plausible that it should have. I mean, when I was in Tehran, I always asked people everywhere I traveled, remote areas, shopkeepers, ordinary Iranians I talked to on the street, I asked them, what do you think about the nuclear program? And I made sure to say nuclear program. And the answer always was, if we had nuclear weapons, Saddam wouldn't have attacked. So everybody always thinks about a deterrent because they remember what happened. What does the regime want to do? How far does it want to go? It's just my guess that the Iranian regime wants to have at least the capability. But there's no evidence that Iran has made the bomb or is going to go that far. But if it wants to have the capability, I think it makes total sense. It doesn't have anything to do with the Islamic Republic. I think any other regime would seek some kind of capability. The question was that women were alienated from public life in the beginning of the revolution. I mean, starting from not being allowed to swim, and of course a lot of women were sacked from their positions after the revolution, especially senior women in senior positions, and now the majority of women are educated, so where are they going? Women are definitely a force of change, and in 2009 they were at the forefront of the protest. They were fearless, and the reason for that, they are angry. They're extremely angry about what has happened to them. One of the interesting things that has happened after the revolution is that the gap between secular women and religious women has disappeared. And the reason for that is because the revolutionaries drew a lot of traditional and religious women from margins of society, from villages, into the center. They gave them responsibility. They employed, the regime employed them. When I went to school, there were teachers called morality teachers. They wore their headscarves very well. They covered their hair, and they came to our schools to teach us about the regime ideology. They wanted to raise a generation that was loyal to the regime, and it all failed. completely failed. First of all, we didn't trust these women. We were so disconnected from them. We didn't understand them, they didn't understand us. They banned us from things that they didn't know what they were. I remember one of them used to say, Akman is bad. And she meant Walkman. And Akman in Persian means original packaging. So she had no idea what she was warning us about. But what happened was that gradually these women changed. By the time I was in high school, I had 2 morality teachers in my school who had braces. They wanted to beautify themselves. And they were the women who always stopped. They took the mirrors at schools away so that we wouldn't be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and sort of beautify ourselves. And what happened was that in the 1990s, a decade after the revolution, these women become Islamist feminists. They started asking for more rights. And one of them started a feminist publication, and in the magazine she published work by secular women. The secular women argued for the legal rights, the legal issues, and then the religious women talked about the religious aspects of it. They went to Qom, knocked on the doors of the clerics, and they asked them to reinterpret the religious law in favor of women. I think by the mid-90s or late 90s, secular women and religious women were both asking for the same things. They all wanted respect for women, more rights, and they wanted them to be treated equally like men. And I think this is one of the biggest achievements of the years after the revolution. But also the anger has turned them into a force of change.
In connection with the same question, that you said 60% of women were graduated. The graduates of university, they were 60% women. But in recent years, isn't there a quota that there's a limit to the number of women who are able to go to university? Do you have any statistics, or do you know what happened after that? And what is the recent statistic? Probably it's not 60% anymore, it's lower.
We don't know, because since Ahmadinejad got elected, numbers disappeared. They stopped giving out statistics. But yes, you're right. They started introducing quotas because there were some fields that the government was saying was dominated by women, and they wanted men to, including engineering, fields that were traditionally dominated by men, women started taking over. Yes, they started introducing quotas, but I don't know if the numbers declined or women still build the majority. I mean, from what you see and from what people tell you, that women are still out there at universities. And the other thing is that I've heard this from so many foreign friends who go to Iran for the first time, and they are shocked. They're shocked that women are in your face as soon as you get off the plane. They are everywhere. I mean, after the revolution, they never told a woman that there was something that she couldn't do. Actually, there were things that women couldn't do before the revolution, and after the revolution, the regime made it possible for them to do it. And one of them was to become a Shiite cleric. I mean, in the history of Shiite Islam, women had not been allowed to go to a seminary and become to be educated and an authority on religious text. But after the revolution, because the regime wanted to train women who would go to schools and teach the nation how to be, what to do. So they started training them to become clerics, and these clerics started asking for more rights for women.
My name is Malik. I'm a student at the Harvard Kennedy School. Could you speak a little about press freedom issues and internet censorship in Iran?
The first one I didn't hear you. Press freedom. That's a good question. There is freedom of press, but there is no freedom after they express what they yeah. So there is freedom of expression, but there is no there's no freedom after they have expressed it. You know what I mean? So journalists do say whatever they want to do. The media is extremely dynamic, very interesting. I must say I enjoy it more than the New York Times or the Washington Post, because they're challenging the regime, they're challenging the establishment. They get arrested, the publications constantly get shut down. Sometimes they re-emerge under a different license, under a different name. But it's a risky business. A lot of reporters have landed in jail. It's been the same with the internet. The government has introduced censorship, different kinds of censorships over the years, but people are very creative in circumventing the restrictions. I mean, you can practically get software for free that allows you to circumvent the restrictions. If you want to pay and get VPN, that's a way, but there is no need for that. There are a lot of Iranian, talented Iranian kids overseas who spend their free time developing software for their own families to circumvent the restrictions, and they give them out to their friends. One thing that you should know in Iran, that you should always keep the Bluetooth feature on your phone on. Bluetooth is used for a totally different purpose in Iran. It's because that if you're somewhere, people want to send you somewhere, including a link to a website that will allow you to circumvent the restrictions, you would receive it on your mobile phone. So if you turn it off, you might miss a lot of valuable links.
Thank you very much. Given the recent events in Paris, could you say a few words how political and Islamic extremism and violence is being perceived in Iran by the leadership, by the media, and by the ordinary people?
Well, Iran denounced it. And every time something like that happens, I think Iranian authorities are very worried that fingers would be pointed to Iran. And this doesn't mean that Iran had never had involvements in these kinds of affairs. I mean, the Salman Rushdie affair, the death sentence for him is one of the worst and one of the famous ones. But I think Iranians have learned that if they want to get involved in those kinds of operations, they do it secretly. They do it secretly in Syria, in northern Iraq. They don't come out and publicize the violence that they're capable of carrying out, especially outside their region, not in Europe. I think the last time they engaged in a kind of violent act was when they assassinated several Iranian dissidents in Berlin in early 1990s. Iranian authorities were tried. Even there was a sentence issued for Iranian president and the supreme leader. The Iranian president, who still holds a senior position, he hasn't traveled to Europe since that sentence was issued. So they learned their lesson. They don't go beyond their region if they're doing anything, and they have not supported that kind of violence openly.
So you left in 2009, and what is it? How would you say now that it's been, all these years? Like, what is exile? What is the everyday of exile like for you? What is it like to still think and breathe and sleep and imagine Iran but from afar?
Well, I still dream about going back. I still dream. I'm in Tehran. I'm in my home. It's in my subconscious, definitely. I don't think about it because I get sad. I get sad that it's my home. And the closest that I can get to my country is by getting close to people who can go there. So I don't think about it. And it was very hard in the beginning because when you immigrate, it's hard. It's one of the toughest things that you do. But you prepare yourself. Mentally, you think about it maybe for years, for months. When you do it, you already have a plan in your mind. We left Tehran with a small suitcase. I hadn't even checked the weather. And that summer was a very cold summer in Toronto. And I kept thinking that we're going to go back. We just kept postponing our return. I still regret that I didn't throw a good glance at our apartment before I shut the door. But 5 years has passed. I have children. They go to school. They've been very resilient. I think that has helped because they've started growing roots here, and because of them, we've been able to grow roots here too. And now I look at it as an opportunity. I feel so lucky that I was able to have a totally new life in a totally different country. And the United States is a place where you come across a lot of immigrants from so many different countries with different experiences. So now I sort of feel lucky that I got this chance to live another life.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation and for your book. I was struck by what you said, that your main frustration when you were 9 years old was that you couldn't swim in the swimming pool. So you were set aside and only the boys were able to swim in the swimming pool. My question is, what is the percentage of households in the whole country that have swimming pools?
Well, you know, we didn't have a private swimming pool, so we were not among the privileged elite that they had their private swimming pool. For me, the swimming pool was a very personal experience that removed me from an environment that I was growing up in. Of course, the pool was not the most painful thing that happened. A lot of people around us were jailed. A lot of people were executed. Our neighbors were taken away in front of our eyes, and they never came back. They were killed. So the pool was not the most painful thing that happened. My father lost his job, and they were very, very tough years for us. So the pool is just something that, in my childish memory, was represented all the violence and all the cruelty that regime change does to a nation. But I'm going to give you another good example of television ownership. You know, before the revolution, not a lot of people had television sets. And you know, TV sets, especially now, is a window to the outside world, because people have satellite TV in that part of the world. Before the revolution, people in the villages did not have even electricity to own a refrigerator. But what the revolution did, that it started developing remote areas. They started building roads, and they connected remote villages to the cities through electricity, tap water, and roads. They built roads. I don't remember the number of television ownership before the revolution. It was very, very low. In 2004, it was 98% in the entire country. And I used to travel a lot in Iran, and the only thing that you see all over the country that looks alike are these aluminum satellite television dishes that are on people's rooftops, and they're banned. So the government every once in a while rounds them up, but people have them. I saw them at the border with Iraq and Afghanistan, which is one of the remotest areas in the country. And the only thing modern that you see there are these satellite dishes. Everything else is mud houses. So the country has changed. And you know, we're talking about a country that has had a huge petrodollar. The flow of petrodollar into the country has been huge, especially in the past decade, with the oil price over $100 a barrel. And the money has been distributed in society as well. Iranians are not rich, but the number of people who earn an income of $3 and up, and $3 is considered lower middle class in Iran, is about 84%. And the number of fancy cars, Porsches, are more in Tehran than here in Boston. Who owns them? No, that is sad. That's not a sign of development, but it's a sign that this is a country where there's a lot of money.
This is after sanction as well, during sanction?
After the sanctions, it's become worse. Yes. because there has been a class close to the regime, affiliated to the regime, that has been smuggling the Iranian oil to bring money back to the country. And they have benefited hugely. Actually, when I was in Iran, these fancy cars were not, you couldn't see them. But now they're all over.
So you're talking about the black market.
Not a black market, because people are driving them in the streets. They're not hiding them. It's not a black market. A class linked to the Revolutionary Guards has benefited hugely from the sanctions, making tons of money and splurging it on their lifestyle. The sanctions have hurt ordinary Iranians. They haven't hurt the regime or people who are close to the regime.
I think one point that I remember from your book, which I think is such an important one, and it applies also to my country, Pakistan. A lot of what you have written about as we talk is that it's so much, I see so many parallels with the women and media and all of that. But one thing is that when an external forces, the United States and the rest of the world, try to isolate or victimize Iran or any country, then it kind of creates a certain mindset in that country that can be very dangerous and that doesn't really help anybody. And I think that really, to me, was a lot of the point of your book, to try and get people to understand not to impose sanctions. That America, the foreign policy in this country needs to be more, needs to be very different towards Iran in order to bring them, back in a way, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think Khomeini managed to stabilize the foundations of his regime only because there was a war. There was a war, and he galvanized the entire nation behind an outside enemy, and of course, people wanted to defend their country. Hundreds of thousands of people, they wanted to defend their country. They wanted to fight against Saddam because this was their country. And so the fact that the revolution was being hijacked by a radical Islamist was forgotten. And whenever there is threats that Israel or the United States is going to attack, the regime starts exactly the same propaganda that there's the enemy. We have to be united against the enemy. And of course, if there's any kind of external threat, what happens that this population, 80 million, they're going to go behind the government. And there is nothing democratic about this regime. The majority of Iranians do want to see change. So it would just postpone any kind of democracy.
And weaken the civil society, which I think is really important to support.
And the sanctions have already weakened the civil society.
Hi. I'm just wondering, why do you think we don't talk a lot about Mossadegh, who was a democratically elected prime minister? We always refer to the revolution, and we don't talk about sort of the main event that led to the revolution, and the fact that Iran did have a democratic leader.
Not a democratic leader. Well,
Most people don't know that history. That's shocking.
Well, I think it's generational. I don't think people have forgotten Mossadegh. Mossadegh is still very much popular. And actually, whenever there was a pro-democracy demonstration in the country, not only in Tehran, everywhere, the protesters brought a picture of Mossadegh, and that was a sign that they are not the religious supporters of Khomeini, those who had opposed the Shah. I mean, that movement and that notion still is very much alive. But we belong to a different generation, and I think it totally makes sense that Mossadegh is a figure in history for us, 1950s.
So I just wanted to mention Nazila and I were neighbors back in Tehran. So the pool was more than the pool. It was like a gated community, a huge pool, not Olympic size, but really big. So private for the people who lived in that community.
Yeah.
And then, so for us kids, what we used to do in the summer is to wake up in the morning, put our bathing suits on, go by the pool, boys and girls, hang out, swim in the pool, and the summers in Tehran are hot. So what happens after the revolution is, the first year they say, okay, the girls can go in the morning, the boys in the evening, and vice versa. The second year, then we were not allowed anymore. So what we would do is with the scarf and then the outfit in the hot summer, we'll be just walking by the pool. When the boys with their bathing suit, they were swimming in the pool. So it's just, it was very, very hard. So it was more than swimming in the pool. It was just like, our freedom being taken away from us in such a drastic way. So.
Yeah. Those who had a swimming pool in their homes, they were the lucky ones because they could keep on swimming. So we suffered more. Yeah. No, I'm so glad that there are people from my childhood, people from my college years in Iran. I tried to use stories that presented the experience of a bigger generation. The stories that happen to a lot more people. The swimming pool is just a very symbolic thing that it shows the degree of government's intrusion into people's life. And it kept on going farther and farther. I mean, there was a point that we couldn't choose the color of our socks under our pants. I mean, every once in a while, the regime came up with a new color that we were allowed to wear. And yet, this is a regime that has survived by intimidating its people. And if that is gone, I don't think there's anything left of the Islamic Republic.
So do you think that you need regime change?
No. No. No, I don't think Iranians of this generation are going to seek regime change. I think they're seeking regime reform because they don't want to see any kind of institutional breakdown. In Egypt in 2012, after the overthrow of Mubarak, I remember I thought Iranians would be very envious because the Egyptians had managed to do something that they couldn't do in 6 months. Iranians couldn't do it in 6 months. In weeks, they got rid of Mubarak. Instead, there were all these comments on Facebook, on Twitter. Okay, congratulations, but we did this 35 years ago. And there were comments like, democracy is not a package that comes to the country. Democracy is a process. And, when you read Iranian newspapers, articles, they all talk about tolerance, about nurturing a civil society, about willing to tolerate the opinion of the opposition. I think Iranians have reached a position that they are patient enough to see the system collapse from within and see a new generation take over. They don't want to change the regime the way the Egyptians changed their regime, the way the Tunisians did. They are afraid of institutional breakdown.
I have a question. There is a saying that during the last years of Shah's regime, because he was kind of opposed so many West notion and rise the petrol price, there was a saying that it might help or let it go if not help Shah's fall by number of Western countries. And then later on, books came like Kenneth Pollack, for example, talking about the CIA arranged that Cinema Rex burning, and some people saying it was a regime to make a bad name for Shah. Shah did for their name. So there's a lot of paradoxical things. What do you think? Was that any theory behind that?
That the Shah was overthrown?
Overthrown, or at least being helped because he was not wanted and he was expired, or was not wanted anymore by...
I don't know. I think the Iranian Revolution was very popular and it was very genuine. I don't believe in foreign conspiracy theories that the foreigners were behind the fall of the Shah. And I think the things that happened after the revolution, the radicalism that Khomeini started spreading, was a serious threat. So no, I think it was something that happened. I don't see any kind of any kind of Western manipulation. No. Yes.
What can you recommend in terms of, I would say, news outlets with air quotes, news outlets, web platforms, Are there venues that you would suggest to we Westerners who are keen to learn more about what's really going on within Iran, but are unable to identify trustworthy resources, or even in the mainstream press or sort of different press? I mean, what would you recommend to read more in addition to your book?
Well, I think reporters are doing their best to present the reality. I mean, sometimes they have to use certain platforms or certain cliches to remind people where this place is that they're talking about. But I'm a Persian speaker. I speak Persian websites. I know all my friends who cover Iran, and they speak Persian. They look at the Persian media. The Persian ones are definitely much more interesting and much more thorough. They're written for the Iranian audience. So I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, translate.
Yes, I'm not sure, yeah. But I would always go back to the original stories. I prefer to read stories that are written by Iranians who know the country and they are on the ground.
There was this thing on NPR a couple of weeks ago about Obama and talking about future possibilities of having an American embassy in Tehran. For all of us Iranian Americans, it's a dream come true. But do you think in our lifetime there's a possibility? That's question number one. B is it really just related to the nuclear negotiation, or do you think it's, what do you predict?
Well, over the years, I have seen and I have heard so many times that the Iranian government has painted the embassy, planted flowers outside, and everybody thought, okay, this is it. They want to hand over the embassy. And it didn't happen. I truly hope that it's going to happen, but it should. We're younger than Iranian leaders. It should. And we have to be optimistic, right? And for Cuba, it took 55 years. But you're right. I mean, there is this also pessimism. I think as long as the Iran Supreme Leader is alive, one thing he's not going to give in is animosity towards the United States. And I think part of his opposition to the nuclear deal is because he's afraid that if Iran goes as far as making a compromise over its nuclear program and give in to some of the demands, it would lead to some kind of rapprochement with the United States, and animosity with the United States, as well as with Israel, have been among the very, very solid foundations of the Islamic regime. And I mean, there's nothing left of the Islamic Republic if women don't wear headscarves, if people don't chant death to America and death to Israel. What is left? Iran would be a normal country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We know, again, very well researched, that sure, there are leaders and there are leaders and there are communicators. There's multiple sources of information, but always the most potent source of information is our own peer groups and the people around us. We tend to underestimate the power of what we have on this.